You were right. The Antichrist is coming, and sooner than most think. So you need a plan. What are you going to do if you're still here? Confront him and his forces, face to face, or escape and hide? This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and few questions are more important. This is life and death, or even life and spiritual death. Yet the question gets absolutely zero attention from pastors or teachers. So today, we're going to answer this in the most biblically responsible way I know how. Because as important as this question is, you're not only going to get my opinion on this, I've researched the opinions of 10 leading Christian teachers on the end times. From recently deceased John MacArthur to Joel Richardson, and even the father of the pre-trib rapture, John Walrood. That, I'm sure half of you are thinking, Nelson, I'm sure Walrood would tell you that we're not going to be here for the Antichrist, and that makes this whole question just worthless. Well, some of you will be out of here for sure. Some of us will die prior to the Antichrist arising. That actually could be a way that God calls some home ahead of time. So as painful as losing a friend or loved one is, for us, it may be God's way of protecting them from what's coming. So that's one way. But even if there is a pre-trib rapture, and I don't think so, but in case there is, we know from the parable of the 10 virgins that half of those attending our churches, half of the virgins are foolish virgins today. And the door of heaven is going to be shut on them. At the very least then, this message will help them. Plus, all of us, no matter what rapture theory we favor, need to lay aside our pride, thinking that we've got it all figured out, because we don't, and realize we could be wrong. We all need to prepare ourselves for the worst case scenario. All of life is like that. It's why we buy insurance. It's why we use seatbelts. It's why we draft a will and have an emergency savings plan. These are ways we prepare for the worst. Yet, when it comes to something as dangerous as possibly having to face the Antichrist, something that spiritually dangerous, people relax. In my part of the country, we draw evacuation plans in case of a severe hurricane, but not for the Great Tribulation. And that's sad. It's really sad. Today on this channel, we're taking action to correct that. And no less an authority than Jesus spoke about this a day or so before he was betrayed and crucified. These warnings are recorded in Luke, Matthew, and Mark. And then 60 years later, an angel gave the Apostle John a vision about this same escape as well. Let's look at Jesus' most famous warning in Matthew 24:15 through 16. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. A very similar command is found in Luke 21:20 through 21. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let those who are out in the country not enter it. Both of these references address when people are to flee, who is commanded to flee, and where they're to go. They also say Jesus expects those alive at that time to see these things. In today's cell phone saturated world, it's easy to understand all believers being able to see these things take place all at the same time. Another clear indication this wasn't talking about 70 AD. Matthew and Mark also say the flight is to take place when the abomination stands in the holy place. Luke, however, suggests fleeing a little bit earlier, when the armies are surrounding Jerusalem, before they enter the city, before the abomination. Both of these commands then are linked to an invasion of Jerusalem that occurs at the midpoint of a tribulation. We believe that the invasion is in just the next several years, and it's the trigger for those in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem to get out of town. But what about Christians like you or me who live somewhere else, like maybe New York or Texas? Well, that's what the rest of this video is about. But if you do live in what the Arabs call the West Bank, this command of Jesus is for you, that you have to leave. It was his direct command. And all the rest of the passages say to do so quickly. Don't go back into your house to get something. Just leave. That's how urgent Jesus is about escaping. The late Pastor John MacArthur put it this way, quote, "When this happens, flee, run. Get out, because as long as you stay in Jerusalem, you're going to be vulnerable to death, especially if you're a Jew, because the Antichrist wants to stamp out Israel. If there happen to be any who are Christians, you better run too. Anybody who refuses to bow to the Antichrist, if you're in Judea, you better run." End of quote. Similarly, Bible teacher Joel Richardson also emphasizes that Jesus' warning in the Olivet Discourse is to be taken quite literally by those in Jerusalem. He notes that the event marks the unveiling of the Antichrist's true nature, as in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, where he sits in the temple and declares himself to be God. And this will trigger intense persecution, we call it the Great Tribulation, for everyone who doesn't bow the knee to him. Richardson also connects Jesus' command with the prophecy in Revelation 12, which portrays a faithful remnant called the woman fleeing into the wilderness to be protected and nourished for 3.5 years. Richardson sees these two escapes as one and the same, and I do too. Now, pre-wrath teacher Marvin Rosenthal gives a slight twist to the when question, which I happen to like, so pay attention to this, especially if you're in Israel. Rosenthal explains that Luke 21:20, which we just read, describes Jerusalem surrounded by the Antichrist armies. This sign will precede the abomination of desolation by maybe a couple days or even a month. In that scenario, those who understand what is happening and use this sign as a signal to flee will have a heads up on those who are waiting till the actual abomination to take place. So I think Rosenthal has very good advice. But if we look at it in combination, whether you flee at the abomination or when the armies form, MacArthur, a pre-trib follower, Rosenthal pre-wrath, and Richardson, a post-trib follower, all say the same thing. Jesus commands those who are in and around Jerusalem to flee into the desert mountains to escape the Great Tribulation, both Jew and Christian. So that's the when question, and everybody agrees. Next is the who question. Who escapes? As John Walvoord pointed out 60 years ago, the context is Jerusalem and its surrounding region. Jesus was clear. Walvoord, who is a pre-tribulationist, believed the church would be raptured before these events. So in his mind, they're already protected. They've already escaped. So only Jews escape in his mind. Richardson and Rosenthal both believe the opposite, that it will be primarily Hebrew Christians that will escape because they're the ones who are currently reading the Christian Gospels, like Matthew and Luke. So the Jews wouldn't even know to escape. But is there another way that Jews from the tribe of Judah or other Israelite tribes will learn when and where to escape? And the answer is yes. Think about it. Who will be on the earth at that time in Jerusalem? The two witnesses. That's right. It's our opinion. They will inform those in Jerusalem and the surrounding area, and their advice will save many. The next question is why? Why does God command those in Israel to flee? When we answer this question, it will solve the dilemma of who is escaping. Pre-wrath teacher Dr. Alan Kirshner is pretty clear that Jesus' explicit warning to flee indicates that God has a desire that at least some of God's people some Jews, some Christians, are meant to physically survive the persecution of the Antichrist's Great Tribulation. And he is going to hide them and take care of them during that period. And this is because God has special things planned for these folks. Now, why Jerusalem? Because it's the epicenter of the Great Tribulation. It's going to start right there in Jerusalem and ripple out from there. So obviously, those in Jerusalem have only minutes, not hours or days, to escape to God's provision. MacArthur describes a coming Holocaust focused on Jerusalem and the Jews, where 2/3 of Israel is going to perish. Then we know that from Zechariah 13:8. This isn't a debatable issue, and many believers are going to be martyred as well. So what are the special things that God has planned for those who escape? On the day of the Lord, immediately after the sixth seal, God is going to save 144,000 Israelites by sealing them with the Holy Spirit. This happens after they see Jesus coming on the clouds in fulfillment of Zechariah 12:10. You probably know this verse. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, see there's Jerusalem, a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on him whom they have pierced. So some from Jerusalem must be preserved to fulfill this verse. I was, however, saddened to see that absolutely all of our esteemed scholars that we're looking at today miss something very important. All of them referred to all these folks as Jews. Now, Jews are among this group, among the 144,000, but they're not all Jews. Jews are those from the tribe of Judah. That's where the word comes from. The 144,000 are gathered from all 12 tribes. Judah is only one of the 12 tribes gathered. So God has to supernaturally protect 12,000 unsaved members of every tribe to seal and save them on the great and awesome day of the Lord. That is the nuance that these scholars all missed. Arnold Fruchtenbaum especially stressed that Jesus' warning was primarily for the Jewish remnant in the last days, even equating the woman who takes flight in Revelation 12, we had just talked about that, as being the Jews only. What he misses, however, is the fact that, the woman in Revelation 12 has a crown of 12 stars, just like there are 12 tribes in the 144,000, one for each of the 12 tribes. It is not just Judah, not just Jews, but all 12 tribes, many of whom are Gentiles who flee as well. Why are believers protected, Nelson? Well, according to Kushner, the answer is that Jesus intends for the elect remnant to be alive at his coming, to be raptured. Raptured alive, as per 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17. In other words, Kushner sees the command to flee as an expression of God's desire to protect some believers so they can avoid the Antichrist's grasp, so that the church is not entirely wiped out. Okay, we've gotten through the idea about those who are in Judea, but what about Christians, say, in New York or North Carolina, like me? Let's answer the big question: should they flee and hide also? Dr. Thomas Ice, a pre-tribulationist, was rather cold. Unintended, ice, cold, get it? Anyway, he was cold about the fate of Gentile Christians. He said, any Gentile Christians who come to faith during the tribulation will have to endure the persecution under Antichrist worldwide. Pre-wrath scholar Charles Cooper takes a similar but less caustic position. He indicated that there's no biblical mandate for Christians to head to the hills when the Antichrist appears. Instead, he said, there is a mandate to overcome Satan and the Antichrist by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. That's Revelation 12:11, even if it costs them their lives. So Cooper's view is don't flee, stay in town, testify, and trust God's will for your life. And if that means martyrdom, just face it bravely. Another pre-wrath scholar, Dr. Alan Kushner, who we've already talked about, argues the exact opposite. That in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus was caring about the safety of his people by telling them to seek refuge. Dr. Allen believes that all believers should be prepared to act wisely, which may include hiding and fleeing as the Lord leads, rather than assuming we all have to just passively stay put. Kushner draws a balanced conclusion. Yes, Christians should take opportunities to escape danger, thereby honoring Jesus' concern for their lives, but ultimately, their spiritual fidelity is important because they may be captured. I like that position. In Matthew 10, Jesus was instructing his disciples when he sent them out 2 by 2. These instructions also bleed over into end-time directives. We've done a video on that in the past. When facing opposition, Jesus instructs these people in the end times to flee from the town they're in to the next town. This is a very similar command to fleeing to the mountains, and it's one that isn't specific to just one group of people in Judea. In our recent fictionalized novel and the upcoming movie that we're doing on it, The Last Seal, which is about a house church going through the tribulation, we show how some of the local house church flee to the mountains on the Tennessee-North Carolina border, and some stay in town to testify, whatever the cost. And you'll find out what that might be. And we show the real-life decisions, why and how each group makes its choice. A link to purchase that book is down in the description if you'd like to read it for yourself. Another thing, though, that I'd like to stress is that Jesus provides for and supernaturally protects the remnant that flees Judea. He has not made similar promises to those of us in other countries. Let me state that again. Jesus is going to provide for and supernaturally protect the remnant that flees in Judea, but he hasn't made that promise to the rest of us. In fact, Jesus has said in Revelation 13:10 that if anyone is taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is slain by the sword, with the sword he must be slain. God has a sovereign will for each of our lives. And even if we choose to hide, you have to be prepared to face persecution if you're captured, because God has not promised that you won't be, unless you're in Judea. So where are those in Judea escaping to? The late Hal Lindsey, who wrote The Late Great Planet Earth, popularized the idea that during the tribulation, a Jewish remnant in Israel will find refuge in the mountains, specifically identifying the ancient rock-hewn city of Petra in Jordan as the likely hideout. According to Lindsay, this fulfills Matthew 24:16 and Revelation 12's image of the woman, Israel, being protected in the wilderness for 1,260 days. Thomas Ice, that we mentioned before, believes the area of safety will be another nearby area in Jordan known as Basra. Both are likely spots. But if you choose to escape, let's say you live in LA, if the Holy Spirit tells you to escape, where are you going to go? And are you ready for that? Or conversely, if the Spirit tells you to stay and testify, are you emotionally and spiritually prepared for that as well? Because that may be your fate anyway, if you're captured. Now, the time you should be planning and preparing is right now, because we may only be 3 years away from that time. But I bet you'd like to know why Lindsay and Ice both thought Judea was going to flee to Jordan. Click right here and learn the biblical reason that Petra and the Basra area are the most likely place that Jewish and Christian remnant from Judea is going to go. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.